We love pockets, right? Tricky as they can often be to sew, the convenience that they provide is, of course, unparalleled, and they also usually serve as a funky little visual accent on your garment as well. But what's also fascinating about them to me is how they figure in the psychology of the sewist. They're often one of the first steps of any project that includes them, they're often one of the fiddliest, and in these and various other ways, they're a kind of microcosm of the project at large. But look, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I've got a pocket to sew, so why don't we talk about it there, eh? Which one of you am I after? This one. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. The disrespect. So like I say, pockets are often the first step in a project, or one of the first steps, or, you know, maybe one of the first sort of actually challenging steps beyond perhaps just sewing together a plain seam or whatever it might be. And you know, you're really just trying to get your head straight, you've overcome the cutting jitters and you've cut out all your panels. You just need a little bit of momentum. And there's that feeling that, you know, whatever actually might happen with the pocket could perhaps make or break the entire mood of the project at large. This, of course, is going to be the welt pocket on the left front panel. I've not put a dart in this coat. I think it's just big and roomy enough. I don't want it necessarily to be super fitted, and I'm going to have the belt as well, as I've mentioned. And so this really is the first step of the project so far. Theoretically, could have done the side seams already, but I just thought with these being larger panels of heavy fabric, I don't want to give myself too much weight to work with. And this is my attempt at pattern matching. So I have this fusible interface, which is going to go on the inside of my welt piece. And I'm just desperately trying to mark where basically the points of the herringbone pattern in this fabric meet, so that I can, yeah, try and align whatever piece I cut, at least roughly, based on the existing pattern in the fabric. And if you want to know how it turns out, well, you're just gonna have to wait, aren't you? Yeah, so the idea is I've drawn that on the wrong side of the fusible interface, and it's gonna go on the inside of the welt. I think that just when I cut out the actual fabric piece that's gonna go on this, or that this is gonna go on, I just need to make sure that these lines at least roughly match up, certainly at least these vertical lines. Horizontal, vertical, who knows? So you see, already at this early stage, right at the beginning of the project, I'm having to get to grips in the form of a pocket with one of the most dastardly elements of the entire fabric shebang. That said, I think this is actually working quite well. I think my track lines have served their purpose and vaguely lined up. Something like that. Ooh, oh, don't do this to me. I do have a feeling that this fabric is gonna have a few twists in the tail over the course of the coming months, years, or, well, you know, decades that it takes me to actually complete this project at the rate I'm going. Something like that. Yeah, perhaps if I just keep ritualistically repeating the words something like that, then nothing will ever go wrong. Will you permit me to dramatically throw you off camera? I'll take that as a yes. Well, I hope I don't have to karmically pay for that disrespect, but anyway, here we go. Pressed onto the back. Oh my God, really makes a lot of noise, doesn't it? Pressed onto the back of the welt piece, so eventually that will sewed on along there, folded up. This will have been folded onto a bit of pocketing or something like that. Can't remember, let's find out. Now, I mentioned this in the last episode as well, talking about the cutting jitters, you know, the way that cutting is the kind of first introduction you have to how your fabric is gonna handle, basically, which is certainly true. Why am I doing it at this angle? This is ridiculous. But when you get to a pocket right at the beginning of your project, the stakes rise and the nuance of what you learn about the fabric and how it's gonna behave over the course of the project grows, deepens, becomes greater, gets nuancier, further nuances itself. What do I know? I've been worrying about this fabric a lot. It's wool, for instance, it's extremely thick and chunky. How, for instance, was it gonna deal with being fused? How is it gonna fold in these sort of tight corners where I'm trying to create this little decorative element, essentially? How's it gonna sew, not just to the rest of the wool, but to the pocketing here and other lighter fabrics, or fabrics of just different weights and consistencies, if that's the word? How is something small like this gonna be pressed? I don't know, we're gonna find out, but I'm not exactly certain I'm gonna like the answer. By the way, when you go shopping for your thread for your new project, please do bring a scrap of your fabric with you so you can check to see if it actually matches. I guess it doesn't go off. Yeah, so when it comes to sewing this fabric, I've decided to try using like a heavy duty denim needle. I think that'll work relatively well. I have already done some test zigzagging / overlocking on a random scrap. You may recall I said I was gonna edge stitch or zigzag stitch the outer edges of every single panel that I've cut out. Obviously, I decided I was too lazy to do that. I think I'll get away with it as far as the sort of frayage is concerned. But yeah, that test scrap, nothing particularly scary happened. It seemed to sew okay. I'm gonna try not to catastrophize too intensely. Yeah, incidentally, I don't know who may want or need an actual tutorial on how to sew a welt pocket. If you do, you can find that here. Please may I respectfully place you on the floor next to the desk so that you're not crowding out the entire table? Sweet, thank you. I'm eyeballing these seam allowances, but I've got no idea what they are anymore. Can't wait to find out why what I've just done is completely incorrect. Yeah, see, fabric behavior, you can already see this kind of tension mismatch between obviously this very light pocketing and this rather heavy wool. Got a little bit of rippling there. I'm not gonna worry about this too much, it's not a big deal. Just an example of what I mean, basically. God, yeah, not the straightest stitch I've ever done either. Whose fault's that, you ask? Don't look at me. I'd like to say that my successful burning of the fusible off the fabric is an example of just what I mean in terms of getting to know your fabric, how's it going to press, how's it going to handle all that stuff. But realistically, that's just me, as ever, forgetting what temperature I'm meant to fuse at. And pockets are also made using these sort of closed off, self-contained techniques, if you like, you know, things like constructing a welt or bagging out a pocket or creating flaps or piping or jetting on a, you know, hip pocket or something. These are all things that kind of exist on their own terms. They exist for their own purposes rather than just, you know, you're sewing one seam of one panel to another and it's just the next step in the construction of the actual structural garment, if that makes sense. So really just feel like a little sort of sewing diorama or a little sewing exercise, basically. And in that sense has its own kind of logic. Oh, is that going to be a problem? That's why you should always cut up and away. Just about to do it again. Got no idea if this is going to successfully turn out. These basting stitches out. See what I'm working with here, my goodness. I don't think I'm going to get a finer point on them than that. It's actually not too bad. That's nice and pressed. Well, it's pressed. Oh, I do really enjoy this weird sort of farmyard smell of this fabric. Just very pleasant, you know, it makes me feel like I'm in a shire or something. Yeah, incidentally, that little snip that I made there into my pocketing by accident, since it's just going to be pocketing on the inside, I've tried to sort of vaguely fix this by first doing a little zigzag stitch across the divide there, and then on what will eventually be the wrong side of this, fuse a little bit of interfacing over it, and that should help it stay at least sort of roughly secure and not just continue to tear throughout. But we'll find out, won't we? This is always a fun part of making the welt pocket. I didn't tack on both ends of that stitch that I did there to close the sides of the welt. I left the bottom ones open, and the reason is because I'm now going to unpick a little bit. That stitch line that I drew on the fusible earlier is visible. This is the line that I'm going to sew it onto the actual garment panel along. It always feels a little bit like cheating doing this, or like I'm making an illegal maneuver. Fast and Furious style handbrake turn around the corner, rather than its respectful highway code appropriate alternative. What am I talking about? Right, let's bring his lordship back into the game. There we are. There we are. It's a horrific new variant of There She Blows, I suppose. There we are. Good lord, I'm losing my mind. Just a bit of reinforcement pocketing for this obviously extremely dainty and vulnerable fabric. And of course, along with all these other things I've mentioned, pockets, as they're about to in my case, God help me, also represent the first time that you're probably going to really be cutting into your fabric. And obviously, I talked about the cutting jitters last week, you know, when you're cutting out, you know, just your big sheet of fabric and you're cutting out your panels, you're cutting out your main pieces. And you know, that's spooky enough. But when it comes to actually, okay, you've cut out your big panels and probably you've not got enough fabric to cut a replacement, should you need to, should you get the pocket cutting wrong. And here you are already, step one, basically, having to contend with the utter terror of making a little snip, wherever it may be, into the hips, or here in my case, over the chest of your beautiful, beautiful, beautiful fabric. And yeah, just hoping that it's right, hoping that you don't overshoot, as I've already done once today, hoping you don't just, you know, cut it at the wrong angle, hoping one of another million terrible things don't all occur either at once or alone, and that your project can continue in its uncursed manner. I mean, when it comes time to really cut in here, I really had better be sure, because there really is no going back. Just giving myself a little sneak preview of whether I've gotten my pattern matching correct, and well, you know, you're gonna have to wait and see. Now we'll only be doing the welt pocket today, and there's a reason for this, beyond my usual laziness. I won't be doing the hip pockets as well, because the front panels are not ready to be hip pocketed, as it were. If you watched any of the videos on my previous suit jacket projects, you can find a rundown of the latest one here. You may remember that I've tended to do my hip pockets before canvassing the front panels of the jacket. Again, this is also gonna be canvas pretty fully, pretty heftily, much like those jackets, but not least because of the extra weight of the fabrics involved, but also just because I think it's starting to seem like a better idea than what I normally do. I'm first going to canvas these panels before I then do the hip pockets. In the case of the chest, because the chest is going to be even more thoroughly padded with horsehair and bit of collar linen, all that stuff, it's not really practical at all to do a welt pocket after having canvas, so this one is going first. But yeah, I think it will have a couple of implications to how I normally do the canvassing. So yeah, I'm excited just to see basically how that little learning curve curves. But yeah, truly, if cutting out your panels from your raw fabric is a kind of point of no return, practically and spiritually, then cutting your pocket opening is a much fierier baptism entirely, I would say. And we're almost there. And so here we have it. I have all the relevant pieces of the pocket attached to the front panel. You'll see here there's this gap between these two pieces, and I'm going to need to cut this now, and that's simply the way it's got to be. I will truly have earned my stripes, or my herringbone if you like. And then for the rest of the project, just what exactly will I have to fear? Other than setting the sleeves, of course, as ever. So I need to cut through here, right through the middle, and not cut through any of the seam allowances on the other side. So either this bit here, or this bit here for pocketing. It's gonna be a bit fiddly. So help me God. No idea what's going on here. Every single time I do this, it's always the same little psychodrama, isn't it? Chocks away. It's the kind of sewing, holding your nerve version of diving in the deep end. Pockets at the start. And that's the thing, again, with this chunky fabric, I have to get so close to these stitches. I have to really get right up to them. With the fabric this chunky, that's gonna be both either very easy in a problematic way or very difficult in a problematic way to do, because everything's just constantly in its own way. But you know, if I can make it here, I can make it anywhere, is the gist of what I'm trying to say. Oh God. Oh God. Have I destroyed anything on the other side? Not for the time being. That's promising, isn't it? I think we're there. We're either there or we're nowhere. That's the crux of what's going on here. So now all of this has to go through that hole. Will it blend? That's the question. It doth. Ish. I actually can't believe it. I actually can't believe it. I'm a genius. This is perfect. Well, I say perfect, but it's pretty good. It's as good as I've ever done. So let's stick with perfect genius. I can't count, but that's not another problem. Strangely, this of all places is where the chunkiness of the fabric is really making itself felt. The cross-stitching of the sides from the back of the welt. So I'm stitching from the bottom here onto the undersides base of this pocket chunk here. And because of its chunkiness and because of the looseness of the weave and everything, it's more difficult than I'd imagined. So I can only take very big stitches, and I really would ideally like a bit more, what's the word, precision, or the possibility therefore. But whatever, don't want to spoil my own party. I call pockets a microcosm of a whole project because they really are just their own thing, like I said before, you know? I could put this in a pocket museum and it would stand alone as its own exhibition, and you know, the panel itself is just context or background, a frame, basically, for this majestic work of art. Such as it may be. I'm not trying to flog a dead horse here, but tell me I didn't knock that out of the park. I don't get these kinds of wins very often.